Hi everyone, thanks for joining our webinar today on how Zephyr and Jira can be used to manage a global SaaS implementation. Your presenters today are me, Chris Bland, I'm one of the founders of BDQ, and Laurence Postgate, one of the founders of WD Pro, who are experts in Workday SaaS implementations. Laurence has very kindly agreed to be a guest presenter today. He's many years experience, as we'll see, and has got some really good insights on how you can use these products on a global projects. I hope everyone can see the screen. If there's any problems, please let us know. So a little bit about us. We were founded in 2002. We're Atlassian solution partner based in the UK. We know a great deal about Confluence, Jira, Agile, Jira Service Desk, done many implementations. We're approved training partner. We also do work in the DevOps sphere. We've done quite a bit recently with Azure and CI/CD with a variety of large customers. Now, a little bit about WD Pro. Laurence, would you like to give a quick potted description?
Yep, no worries. WD Pro, we were founded in 2018. And we specialize in software as a service, HR and HRIS implementations and the quality management side of that. We specialize especially in experts on Workday. So we're independent test experts. We aren't Workday partners as some other companies are. We like to keep our independence. And we provide test managers and test resources to enable these projects to ensure that their quality assurance is up to scratch on the programs. We also provide a QA for quality assurance framework, which we deploy at our customers' behest. We try and make it slightly bespoke for each customer, but it follows similar footprint each time. And we also have a global footprint, so we work in the US and Europe, as well as a lot in the UK as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And perhaps you want to, we always like to do a little bit of personal introduction about the actual people speaking today. So Laurence, this is you.
Sure. Well, my experience goes back to around 1998, doing software development and implementations, and then moving into the testing and quality assurance side of things. And I've been doing project management and test management since then. It seems like a while back now. WD Pro, having started in 2018, we've been involved in over 20 global transformation programs. And so we've got a fairly wide breadth of experience across all the industry types, ranging from large international engineering companies to smaller businesses in specific countries like Finland or the UK. On a personal note, I like to play badminton, try and keep fit. It's been a little bit hard in lockdown, so I resorted to cycling, but I love to travel also, and did manage to get away to Cyprus, which has hardly any lockdown because their COVID is very good. So I had a nice break recently to Cyprus, but we're back now working. Also, I like to adopt virtual reality technology as soon as it comes out. It's just an obsession of mine, and I'm looking forward to when that becomes a little bit more mainstream and everybody's enjoying augmented reality and virtual reality as part of their work and home lives. That little potted history of me.
Okay, a little bit about me. I've got a lot of experience in test management QA. We've written Zephyr training courses, which we delivered for quite a number of customers actually, all around the world. Done quite a lot of work both in waterfall and agile development methodologies, and have developed software. One of our backgrounds, BDQ, was we used to sell, in fact, author and sell data profiling tools, which did data quality. I am a certified Jira administrator. I've got a couple of Atlassian certifications in Agile as well. So we basically help customers with consultancy and training and reselling the Atlassian stack. I say on a personal note, to follow Laurence, actually I enjoy sailing, which I have managed once this year, although the weather was a bit rough, but at least we actually got out. And I own a dog. I like dogs as well, a bull mastiff in actual fact. So house rules, very quickly, you can ask questions in the GoToWebinar control panel, the right-hand side of your screen. You can ask anything you want throughout the webinar. We'll try and make it interactive, and please feel free to participate. If for whatever reason it's not appropriate to answer it then and there, we can try and take questions at the end, or by all means contact us. This recording will go out after the webinar at any rate. So if I just advance that. A little bit about the agenda today. We thought it was very interesting. We did some work recently with WD Pro, which we'll cover off in a minute. What WD Pro is, they manage large-scale IT implementations. So, you know, a lot of people we work with, or our customers, actually deal with building software or developing software projects, often for internal use or maybe for external. But what WD Pro do is deal more with large-scale IT implementations, primarily around SaaS. And these sort of really have sort of quite a different challenge, far more distributed in nature. They involve many people. There are a lot of working parts. We're not necessarily building things, but there's an awful lot of detail to get right to get these projects out the door. And Laurence is going to cover a lot of this, and I thought it'd be really interesting for you to hear how actually a company successfully manages this and successfully manages these things with Jira and Zephyr. So this is practical, real-world information on how these projects can be managed by someone that's done it successfully. Why are we doing this presentation together? Well, actually, Laurence has actually, we've worked closely with Laurence on other projects, such as service desk implementations at other customers he's worked at. And he knew we were experts on matters at Atlassian and Zephyr. And WD Pro actually wanted a sort of a pro forma, which is a good way of putting it, Jira instance that could be reused again and again, because you wanted a consistent methodology that could be applied to multiple clients to help deliver these projects. We provided some of the expertise for the configuration and setup, which WD Pro now use. And I think on that note, you've heard enough from me. I'd like to hand over to Laurence now to talk about what WD Pro do and how they use Zephyr in Jira to do it.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, that was good potted history of why we're connected. Workday programs. For anyone out there who's not familiar with Workday, I thought I'd quickly outline that it is an HR-focused solution, at least initially it was, and it's a software as a service, which means they have one code base, and there's no tweaking of the code base possible. So they provide it in the form of tenants, which are essentially environments that sit out in the cloud that customers purchase, essentially rent from Workday. So a little bit like Salesforce and some of the other major platforms, these solutions are kind of one size fits all. However, you can obviously configure the solution. So you're no longer doing software development. What you're doing is configuring the solution to meet your business's needs. Workday has stretched out a little bit beyond its just HR. So now they are supporting global payroll, finance, and they're moving into learning and development. But it very much focuses on people and people within the business. It is a very big player in the market now. It stems out of PeopleSoft originally, which is still going, but the people moved to work and founded Workday. And it's had a massive impact on the market. So you use it really for human capital management and then managing all of your business processes that require people to get involved in, essentially. It hasn't yet branched out into complicated logistic management in the same way that SAP does, but it certainly does finance, HR, learning and development, manages expenses, compensation, salaries, all that kind of stuff. What does it touch on? So that question is interesting. Workday, and in fact any HR solution now, is recognized as possibly the most important aspect to any business. So if you can get the core people data right within a business, then all of your other business processes, solutions, systems, your partner organizations, all of their lives are made much easier by having up-to-date and accurate people data. If you don't have that, then there's a whole bunch of risks that come with that, even going down to the level of taking companies down in some cases. So essentially Workday, while it sits in the middle of everything, therefore it has integrations. And I would say that those are probably the largest challenge that any Workday project has. WD Pro, we work with other solutions as well, not just Workday, things like SuccessFactors and SAP and things. So we're very familiar with integrations. However, the people implementing Workday, which are often the HR teams within companies, they are normally not so familiar with the rigor that needs to go with integration testing and integrating systems together. So the integration side of things is really the tricky piece. There is, of course, the business challenge of getting your company's data all correct, and getting that into Workday can also be another challenge. So I would say Workday itself is a little bit like buying Microsoft Word or Salesforce. You know, it comes out of the box and it works. But the configuration of Workday to integrate with other solutions to support your particular business, those are the tricky bits. I've put on this slide accelerated deployment methodology, which is the term that Workday themselves use for the approach. And this will make more sense as we go into the further slides, because Chris and I have worked together, BDQ and WD Pro worked together before on agile projects, and we also work extensively on waterfall projects, which is the sort of more traditional approach to project management. And those two things are very different. And the accelerated deployment methodology that Workday uses sits somewhere in between. It kind of uses a configure and prototype approach, which sits in the middle, where you get a version or a configured version of Workday, one of the Workday tenants, and then you test it. It's kind of similar to Agile. And then you iterate and do another prototype. Normally there's about 3 stages before final gold production build is created, and then that goes live. So this accelerated deployment methodology is a halfway house between, in my view anyway, they don't say that, but I think it's a halfway house between waterfall, which the companies very often want to start to adhere to, and agile, where you want to be much more light on your feet. But it's neither. You can't be completely agile, and you can't really be completely waterfall with the Workday's projects. So bear that in mind as we go on in the slides now. As with most transformation projects, any Workday or SaaS transformation program really needs solid but flexible business processes. Companies may often not have those in place initially, so it either happens as part of the project. Ideally, if it's happened before the project, then you've got a good foundation, but that rarely happens, and you need to be able to manage change as people alter the way they want their business processes to work as the project continues. But you need to get the business processes solid, because if they are all over the place, then it's very difficult to get any project over the line. Also, adaptive technology. Normally, these kind of projects are driven by the senior leadership realizing and desiring to put technology which will adapt and evolve into their company in order to support the business change, like the business processes changing all the time. And so those two things are normally well understood. We don't focus too much on those. What we try and do is really focus on the user adoption. But in order to get the user adoption working, we need good business processes, and we need the technology to support those business processes. So WD Pro, our focus is really quality assurance. So it's allowing companies to understand and monitor how their program is going so that they can see off any issues earlier rather than later. And we focus on the test management, and even before testing, etc., begins, issue management and tracking, and putting a quality management framework in place so that we can see what's happening with the project. And then after the end of that whole process, we use these solutions, which we have like Jira and Zephyr, to help drive adoption of the solution. Because if your staff don't use the solution at the end of it properly, then the whole thing's been a bit of a failure. One of the major differences between Workday projects and many other projects, including agile ones, and especially waterfall projects, is requirements. So very oddly, when I first started all of this in the sort of SaaS market, very oddly, I couldn't find the kind of requirements that I needed as a test manager to be able to say to the customer, well, here's the requirement, we've now tested it, and it works, it's fine. And that's partly to do with the fact that the requirements are constantly changing, but also that customers are now moving with these kind of projects towards business outcomes. So they want their business processes, whether they're properly articulated or not, to work with their new solution. So it's a little bit like giving somebody Microsoft Excel and saying, there you go, there's Excel, now go away and do your accounts on it. It's not quite that bad in that we do configure it, whether the implementation partner will configure it and get it all working for you. So it's a bit more like having a pre-prepared accounting spreadsheet. So you don't actually go and change any of the code. And so writing requirements is a bit of a nonsensical thing to do. So if you really need a truly custom system and we need to go write a whole Prince 2 set of requirements and then functional requirements, etc., then you're doing a custom build, and SaaS is not appropriate for you. So instead, what Workday and other companies and implementation partners try and do is we look for customers to adopt the solution rather than adapt it. That doesn't mean that we can't adapt stuff, and that the implementation partners can't change things. We can, but the more change that people do to the vanilla system, the harder it is when changes come down each year, twice a year, because you need to retest and regression test the solution. So the best thing is to try and take the vanilla solution and adapt it as little as possible. And therefore, we're focusing on business outcomes. That is really the key driver for why you'll see that these SaaS programs are different from other ones, because not having proper requirements that are defined up front which don't change, we have to deal with requirements that may be wrong or may be a bit woolly and change regularly. So we can't just stick with a whole set of version requirements and keep on versioning them. Some companies do manage to do that, but it's very hard, and in the end they get a fairly basic implementation of Workday, which they then start changing. So I'll move on to the next one. Managing those requirements, which don't really exist, is tricky. So the way that tends to happen is we take what is in Workday. So Workday has a whole bunch of business processes. The customer looks at those business processes, and instead of writing requirements to say Workday must do this and Workday must do that, we go, well, Workday does that. So what we're going to do is we will give that business process to our subject matter experts, and we'll say, does this work for you? And they go, yeah, it does, largely. A couple of tweaks needed, and then away we go. So understanding on the SME's part, people who really know the business, the subject matter experts, that evolves as the project moves on. So we don't give them the requirements, we give them all the business processes, they understand them, they change perhaps the way they think they're going to work. They might actually want to get the business to change significantly in some cases and to better utilize the new solution. But it's not just good enough to have them make those tweaks and changes. We need to get a prototype in place. So we have a Workday tenant, which then gets updated with all these tweaks and changes that the SMEs would like to see in the process. And then we run that as a prototype, and the prototypes normally go through 3 to 4 iterations before they're finally built. And that way, we're able to prove that the business processes are functional and we can do them as using Workday to the extent that the business needs. Or if they don't work well, we're able to work out how we can fix them. There is a caveat to that, is there are certain things that obviously we cannot just let go. So these are requirements which genuinely have to be written down and understood. They may even not be known about initially in the beginning of the project, but we do need to identify them. It's part of the project's responsibility to find legal, regulatory and financial requirements, sometimes reputational ones as well. And these ones, if Workday doesn't do that properly, then we need to configure the heck out of it and make sure it does, because we cannot put a system in that is illegal or does something that's illegal or doesn't support legal requirements. And the same with regulatory and major financial impacts obviously wouldn't be acceptable. So those kind of things we treat as special cases normally. But ultimately the business needs to get the outcome that it wants, but we also need to change the way the business works in some cases to get those outcomes. So it's not enough just to roll over and go, yes, we'll configure the heck out of Workday now, just because 5 people in South Africa need to do something slightly different from the rest of the company globally, for example. So it's not always South Africa. Actually, France is quite common too. Anyway, I'm jesting. We therefore encourage people to use the solution as it is. We also try to keep tight control of the scope of testing and quality assurance within programs. We don't do the program management as such. We're more about the quality assurance and testing. But we need to plug into the program management, and we need to prove to the senior management that the business processes in Workday have been not only implemented correctly, but also are usable. Now, from what I said earlier, you might ask, well, how do you define correctly? Because if we've got their requirements, what is correct? And really, the answer is, can the staff in your company do their business processes successfully on a day-to-day basis using this new solution? And that is correct. So correct is people using the solution and successfully doing their job. And that obviously is sometimes quite difficult to write down. So we tend to use a risk-based approach for that as well, because it's not really possible to test every single aspect of Workday, and nor should you. What we need to test are the business processes that are critical. So, for example, uploading your photo to Workday so people can see who you are. It's useful, great, but Workday does that fine. There's not really any reason to go away and test that, because, you know, if it didn't work for one of the users, they could raise a help desk call and then we'd sort it out, or Workday would sort it out. So we want to focus on things that are important, such as being able to pay people correctly, being able to do expenses. And sometimes there is a bit of triage needed where we go, this is going to be a lot of work to fix. It's only affecting a small number of individuals in one country. So we're going to have to just put a manual process in place. And many IT projects find that an anathema. But actually, you know, sometimes we just have to deal with the fact that it's a low risk problem. It's not affecting many people. So we're going to just have to suck that one up. The key thing that we need to do for all of our QA and test management projects is to be able to let the management, the program management and hire, monitor the progress and see any issues that are coming up well in advance. So to do that, we need to have the project teams properly motivated, understanding why they are using solutions like Jira and Zephyr to record their progress, because a lot of people don't want to do that. They just want to get on with the job. So we need to educate them, motivate them, and if necessary, we need to train them. So sometimes a bit of training in Jira or Zephyr will be needed. Now, if we get those right, if we get that all correct, and we get motivation right, and we have the right tools, then visibility and progress for the management is excellent. And you'll see great dividends putting the right tools in place. If you don't, then what happens is you find people will start to make stuff up. They will get to the point where they've got a deliverable and they'll say, yes, it's all fine, and there's no numbers to back them up, but actually it's not, because people in their heart of hearts don't like to say things are going behind, running behind. So to actually have facts and data is really important when you're doing project management, just to take the pressure, if anything, off some of the people. So if people are falling behind, they don't feel stressed out about it. They're able to report it and ask for help. And that's a key thing. We do need the right tools, though. We also need tools in place which will support remote working. We've always needed that. It's not just since the virus problems we've had this year with COVID. We've always needed people globally to work on these projects. We need the implementation partners to be able to access the solutions. We need all business units in, could be 60, 70 different countries, not just HR and IS, but people everywhere, because people data affects everybody in every part of the business, unless your business is entirely built of robots, but I haven't met any yet. Third-party suppliers, that's another thing that people very often forget, is that if you have a whole company working fine and raising defects and issues in Jira and running tests and things, if that's not visible and not doable by your third-party suppliers of other software solutions like payroll systems and that kind of thing, then reporting becomes a nightmare. You can't you can't hand issues over to third-party suppliers to resolve easily. It all involves email trails, and we just try to steer clear of email trails because it's such a nightmare to unpick what's happened in those. So we need somewhere centralized that all parties can access the systems. Some companies have applications management service who will manage their HR systems, AMS, and they also need to be able to feedback. So you really need a solution that's cloud-based, in my view. It is possible to have on-site, on-premise systems too, but I thoroughly recommend cloud-based, and I don't know many people who are just sitting with on-site ones now. Quality management, quality assurance framework. That's what we implement in our customers. Normally, it's a sort of high-level framework that allows people to monitor, to understand how their program's performing, and above all, red flag any issues that are occurring as things move on. Most people think that it comes for free with their program manager or with the company they use to program manage, but it doesn't come for free. Very often people leave that and assume that it's going to work just by virtue of having an issue management and tracking system and a project management office, the PMO. But actually, you need to be worrying about quality assurance right at the beginning of the project, possibly even before you've selected the solution that you're planning to use. Whether you're going to go SuccessFactors, Workday, or another solution, Salesforce or something. Even before you select that, you need to start tracking issues, because as you make those selections and as you make decisions, people will be raising issues. And it's those issues that may have knock-on effects further downstream. So very often management don't pay any attention to quality assurance until they start getting into the testing stage, and that really is too late. It's not impossible, but it does make things a lot harder, and it increases the likelihood of project slippage and therefore cost and extra effort. So that's the main reason to use a QAF right up front, is that it'll save you money and time if you start using it at the beginning.
Actually, Laurence, is an interesting. Yeah, I've got to say, we most of our clients usually use Zephyr to deliver software as part of an agile or waterfall process, and I think it's absolutely fine. Some of the key concepts that people focus on is releases, which are, is basically the concept of a set number of things that should be delivered by a date, and that concept supported in Jira, sometimes known as fixed versions, and in fact it tends to be integral to the way you use Zephyr. I usually recommend people use releases because it helps with the Zephyr reporting. It has the concept of test cases, which are Jira issue types, and also test cycles, which are groups of test cases that are to be executed. And the usual context there is you might have a set of tests that you're going to execute as part of a regression, You may want to re-execute them if the results weren't great. You may have a UAT set, you may have a smoke test set. You see, you have multiple test cycles which comprise of sets of test cases. And that's typically how you would use Zephyr in a software project. You may use it at the end of sprints, or you may before a release is done. Now, our discussion we had with, discussion you and I had, was that's not really how you use it in your Workday projects. So all these concepts exist and they're there in the tool, but you don't use them in that way per se. So it was interesting to see how you used Jira and Zephyr to deliver your project.
Yeah, so in fact, we do that kind of work a lot, but in these Workday projects and other SaaS solutions we've implemented or helped implement, you're right, Chris, it's very different. And the reason it's different is because we're not using professional testers. So there are some professional testers, perhaps testing integrations and things, some of the key areas like that, which the IT department normally would insist are properly tested. They need those kind of things. So it is used to some extent on this project, but most of the testing that goes on is by business users, subject matter experts, etc. They may never have used test tools before. Also, the program needs to have issue tracking in place, but the words requirements, test cases, releases, test cycles, they will often be foreign to most people who are working on the Workday project, and they may never even hear those unless they're getting involved in integrations testing. What actually happens, therefore, is we tend to use the words test scenarios because they are where they need to test things. And we like the use of test scenario because people understand the words, they understand that they're going through a scenario, their business process, and they can write sort of scenes or scenarios of things that need to happen. They still link to business cases as or other the business requirements, but remember, we may not define those fully. So what you tend to get is a whole set of business processes in Workday, and then we have to write a whole bunch of test scenarios that relate to each of the business process. So each business process might have a number of test scenarios. Now, you and I would know that test cases and test conditions, but to the average business user, they are just writing a scenario, and the scenario is based on what they need to do their day job. So that's how they think about it. So we tend to steer clear of those words. We therefore set Zephyr up to have test scenarios in it, but we don't often have test steps, say. So with SaaS solutions, there are normally multiple ways to achieve the same end. So you can get into raise a expenses claim through multiple routes in Workday. You could do a search for something. You could do a click through. You could get a couple of different ways via clicking through sort of your personal dashboard, or you could go to the menus. So what we don't do is try to test that the menus work, the dashboard works, they all work because Workday has been extensively tested by the company already, so the software works. What we need to test is, can a user log in and raise an expense claim? So some scenarios might be as simple as that, is log in as yourself and raise an expense claim for an amount of money that you might want to claim back. Alternatively, we might go a little bit more detailed and actually say raise an expense claim for something that is above your company policy for expenses. So let's say there's a £50 limit for the company. You might raise something beyond that. We might not tell them what to put in. We might just say put it above that. And that might be, in your, my world, that's a test case that we need to do. But in their world, that's just the scenario they need to do. So we tend to have those rather than cases.
Interesting. Yes, I remember you saying, Laurence, it tended to be, you wouldn't have the steps, you would tend to operate at a higher level, really, and it's all about can people do their jobs as broken down by a set of different scenarios, as opposed to the usual way of testing things where we might be interested in slightly more detail. That's very interesting. So I think if we
walk into exploratory testing.
Yes, exactly.
But it needs to be planned in advance, though. So test scope is important. So you can't just let them have a go at the system. They still need to know what they're testing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the next slide, actually, you do cover a little bit of an example of a specific test scenario. So we are now going to move on as we move towards the end of the presentation, some actual specific screenshots about how you are actually using Zephyr in practice. And this is Zephyr Cloud, by the way, for anybody, or Zephyr and Jira Cloud for anyone who's thinking it looks, any server users out there thinking it looks a bit strange.
Yes, so these are genuine examples. So like I said, in this case, we have test scenarios in there. You can see that this one is to do some Brazilian tests we needed to do. This is a defect retest. I put that one in because you can see where we've actually linked defects in the midsection, which have been raised previously to this test, because when we run this test, it's going to decode. But look, like any normal tester looks at this and goes, wow, okay, that's pretty basic. There's hardly anything on it. There's no test steps. So if you click to the test details there will be nothing to see. There are obviously test executions, but it's very lightweight. It's just telling the SME and people who come afterwards for posterity what happened or what should happen during the test. And then you'll see a comment down the bottom where there's kind of, to do this test, I first need to create a new position. So you can see this is very much kind of work in progress. It looks more like a Jira issue than a test. So anyone who's a professional tester like me will be kind of going, oh, this is a load of rubbish. How can we rerun this test? We don't know how that's happened. But this isn't really what it's about. This is about that person whose name I've redacted out. It's about that person saying, yep, I have managed to demonstrate that the system can do this with Brazilian national IDs as required. Now, we still, and further down here, I haven't put it on here, but further down there is evidence of the test working and things like that. So it is possible, audit-wise, to go back and see what they've done and understand how the test works. So it's not completely Mickey Mouse, but it's much simpler than you would normally have in a test project. And, you know, we have tried in the past to over-engineer it and make these tests with steps and all that kind of thing. And it just doesn't work. The projects move too quickly. People start to get fatigued very rapidly. And then worse than that is when changes are needed, it's really onerous to make those changes. So something that is much more rapid is needed. And those tests will sit in test cycles, as we can see on this slide here. So this is, anyone who's familiar with Jira or Zephyr will recognize this. There we go. We have a whole bunch of test cycles. So for a normal testing project, that looks fairly reasonable. In this case, we've used test cycles to delimit the tests by country and also by payroll grouping. So these pieces here are about putting the tests into groups, which are Jira Zephyr test cycles, but they're not genuinely test cycles as you and I would know them, Chris. They are more about groups of tests that people may run and rerun and run again until they are happy that Workday now meets the business processes they've outlined here. So you can see some here, time off and leave, maternity leave, and there they put a comment in saying the system must accept lower than the balance 120 days. So for you and I, that's a wonderful example of a test case with some conditions associated with it.
Absolutely.
Personally, never heard the name test condition.
No, indeed. So yeah, I mean, often we would see here where it says P1 configuration and prototype, that would often be a release like version 1, version 2, version 3.xyz. And below that, we may have some test cases which are to do with regression, smoke testing, UI testing, whatever it may be. But actually, you're using test case here, aren't you, to break out your groups of test cases across country in this particular case.
And the P1 piece you mentioned, that is prototype 1. So there'll be a P2 and a P3. So where previously those would be releases, they are kind of analogous to releases because they are the first prototype we get, and then the second, and then the third, and then finally would be the production one. So they do kind of map onto release, and I do use releases in that way. But it's not what us software engineers would call a release. We'd really call the release is the final gold one. It's more like a very long, because these P1 things, the configuration prototype could take several months to do. So it's like massive sprints almost.
Well, and also, I mean, just so people understand this, I mean, how large was this particular client? I mean, how many sort of people was this project going to touch by the time it was finished?
Well, it's about 65 countries, and there are about 15 to 20,000 workers involved. They may not all be permanent, some of them will be contingent, some of them might actually work for third parties, which gets pretty confusing. But yeah, is that order of magnitude. So a large global multinational.
Yeah.
And Amazon, for example, use Workday to some extent. Bank of America, those kind of international companies. So really big companies use it. But now we're moving into the realm where smaller companies are starting to use Workday. These same challenges apply for smaller businesses, but they're slightly different.
But I think the interesting thing here for me is you're using actually Jira and Zephyr, very, very reasonably priced tools to manage actually what is a very, very large project and a very large testing exercise. I mean, what we're seeing here is just actually quite a small fragment of all the prototypes and test cases and test cycles that were involved.
Yeah. If I was an IT director back in sort of 2011, I'd been horrified, to be honest, that such a large project could be managed without decent testing like this. But then it isn't decent testing, and I would have been missing the point as the CTO at that point. I've been missing the point that we aren't testing software here. What we're doing is testing our staff's ability to use a new system we've given them to do their day job. They're very different.
And as you said right at the beginning, which I think was a very brave statement, SaaS projects make detailed requirements obsolete.
Yes, I know. I'll get shot down for that from a number of people, but it just does. We do need some detailed requirements in the areas of integrations, for example, because we are dealing with systems that Workday has to integrate with in a certain way. So they're not obsolete in those areas of the project, but in most areas of the project, which is the sort of change management and the business processes and all that kind of stuff, there isn't any point in writing detailed requirements. You're much better prototyping, starting to use the system, and then using a quality management framework or quality assurance framework like ours to prove that the solution is now usable and doing what you need it to for your day jobs. It's a very different mindset.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Laurence. We've certainly moved towards an agile method now for delivering. When we do project work for people with Atlassian toolkits, we tend to use an agile approach where we focus on the outcomes that people want. And then we iterate over those in an agile fashion to move towards those outcomes. Because as you say, there's no point debating the way a screen in Jira on Jira SaaS is configured. It is what it is. It's more a question about actually can the solution actually meet your business needs, and it's trying to get to the bottom of those and get a solution that you're happy with. So yeah, prototyping is very, very important. We like to try and get things to the customer as quickly as possible, actually, so we can make sure we're all on the right track and it's best form of communication. So yeah, I can see you're doing a similar thing here with Workday, but it's on a different scale. I think actually we're a little bit over on time. We've got 2 more slides, haven't we? I think, and then we should probably.
So real-time reporting, that's the main goal, holy grail really out of Jira and Zephyr, is to be able to show the program management how everything's going. So I took a couple of screenshots of how things have gone quite well on the project. Those are by integration, so I'm showing you that actually these things, in some cases, we do break it down in a more traditional way and have integrations in different test cycles. So that really was a short intro to the way we use these tools in Workday. We do use other tools, but we certainly have to have cloud tools. And I've used Jira and Jira Zephyr on almost all of the Workday projects we've done since 2014. So that gives you an idea of how useful it is.
No, that's great. Well, look, thank you very much indeed, Laurence. I hope everyone listening found that useful. often we talk about just how the tools can be used, and it's almost semi-training, but today it's been a little bit different, where somebody who's very experienced is using the product, how they're using the products to actually deliver real world, very large, very complicated projects. And we thought you might actually find that useful to listen to. And I hope you did. And thank you very much indeed, Laurence, for sparing the time to discuss that.
No, I really enjoyed it. Always happy to talk to you, Chris, and anyone else who's with us.
Okay, well, look, if there's any questions, please fire them into GoToMeeting, into GoToWebinar. Otherwise,
hang around, no problem.
Yeah, we'll hang around for a minute or so. And otherwise, many thanks for attending, and I hope you found it useful. Our contact details are here, BDQ Cloud. As you can see, if you Google WD Pro, you'll find Laurence's site. I'd say if any of you are doing Workday implementations, you should absolutely check them out.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Okay, well look, many thanks, and I hope to see you all again at our next webinar. And hope you all have a great rest of the day. Thanks a lot. Bye.